Okay, welcome back, everyone. We are at another episode of The Human Role, and this one is super duper special because, as you can see, I have back my prior co-host, Chris Wood. Hi, Chris. So really excited to have him back on this episode. We're, of course, in a minute going to get into the FTC's ban on non-competes. That is stirring and causing a bit of an uproar in across all industries. So really interesting topic to dive into. But before we do that, it's been 6, 7 months or so since Chris stepped away. He got other great opportunities. And so really, Chris, would like to just welcome you back. So glad that we were able to stay connected. Chris and I have, really good friendship behind the scenes, and just want to give you the floor so you can tell everyone what you've been up to, how things have transpired with you. So just let us know what's been going on, how things have been going on your end.
It's so good to be back with you, and congratulations on all of your success with the podcast. Let's see, in the last half a year or so, I think I can just note a couple of quick things. First, I've become a board member on the fantastic New York Metro chapter Payroll Org, and I'm continuing with the biannual study groups for the payroll professional exams. And it's a really great group of people. I encourage anyone to check out their website and attend any of the events that are of interest. They do a lot of them virtually. The second thing that has been keeping a bit of my time recently is I finished up volunteer mediation training with the New Jersey courts. And I'm going to be taking next steps over the summer and eventually begin with that process. So I've been keeping busy with those two items, as well as my 9-to-5 job also keeps me busy, as there are always a lot of payroll-related topics to explore. Including today's topic, as it touches on a little bit of payroll and a little bit of HR too, which is what Tiana's podcast, The Human Role, I think does best.
Thank you so much for that, Chris. Look, the mediation sounds intense, huh? I feel like that's but you know what? In payroll, you're always kind of indirectly mediating, right? When someone, comes to you about questions and topics like this. So glad to hear all is still going well on your side. And let's definitely get right into the meat and potatoes of our topic here. So the FTC's ban on non-compete has just been a high-end topic. So I think from an employee stance, I feel like, at least assume in my opinion, from an employee stance, it's probably going to be a bit of a relief. But from an employer stance, it is causing somewhat of an uproar. So let's get into specifically what a non-compete is for those of you who aren't familiar, and then also the specific history of non-compete and how that has come about. So non-competes are contractual agreements between, an employee and an employer. Typically, it's signed off on during your onboarding documents once you are brought on to a company, and it really helps protect the company's trade secrets, all of their proprietary information. It also just prevents the employee from going to an actual competitor or potentially starting their own business that could be a competitor of the employee that they have worked for once they exit the company, and it lasts for a specific time frame, a specific time period. And so a lot of times that can kind of hold the employee back a little bit, but it does, it is more so geared towards protecting a company. And now we're kind of seeing a shift where the employees are starting to be more protected. So Chris, I'm going to let you jump in on some of the history of non-compete and how this all came about.
Something that I, in doing a little bit of research, was a bit surprised, because in my mind, I typically think of non-competes at higher end levels in employment in companies, and not dating back that far. However, the history of non-compete contracts can be traced back to the early common law, particularly 15th, 16th century England, where the economy relied heavily on the apprenticeship system and even the guild structure. And something that I noticed looking back, a touch on non-competes, where I said, typically someone might think this is maybe for at the executive level or higher or certain other industries. There was actually a lawsuit I looked at back in 2016. And if you're familiar with Jimmy Johns, settled an Illinois lawsuit over non-compete agreements and agreed not to enforce them, allowing former employees to take jobs with competitors. And I thought that was very interesting, where you have employees who are, I don't know if they were minimum wage or they had a salary, but they were maybe on the lower end, entry level type of positions, but still having that non-compete agreement. Now, I didn't do as much research into the lawsuit to see if it was ever enforced. Jimmy John's, if someone went to Subway and if they enforced this non-compete, it didn't seem to be the case, but I think it piqued my interest in that my initial reaction to it was something different than what, as I read a bit more, non-competes, because they typically are for white collar workers. So a traditional economic argument, as Tiana was talking about a little bit, in favor of enforcing non-compete assumes that the labor markets are competitive. Workers, they freely enter into these agreements, return for higher wage access to the employer development, trade secrets, and customer contacts, which I think we'll get into a little bit. Tiana was talking about just before slightly where, that could be the employer concern. There's going to be an HR and possibly payroll related things that employers might, want to start to look into before this effective date happens. But also there are trade secrets and customer contacts that businesses could be concerned about as well, particularly when it comes to intellectual property and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say too, when you're mentioning like the Jimmy John's employees, I think there was a stat you had found, Chris, at one point when we were discussing this topic where a good bit of percentage of employee populations that don't even make more than 40,000, I think 40,000 or less a year, majority of them are under non-competes, right? And so that does seem a little bit, drastic, I guess, depending on the industry, kind of depends on that. But you're really holding people back, right? People are really fearful, which we will get into in a little bit in a couple other questions. So let's get into our next conversation discussion on like what the primary reasons were for the FTC to oppose a ban on non-compete agreements. I mean, we're talking about, helping the economy, helping, put money back into the employee's pocket, also not being so, exploitative and so forth. So Chris, I'll let you kind of talk about like the low potential harm on employees, with keeping their wages low and keeping people fearful.
The FTC's idea or concept behind this ban on non-compete clauses. One of the first items they talked about was that it keeps wages low, suppresses new ideas, and according to the FTC, it could rob the American economy of dynamism, including from the more than 8,500 new startups that will be created once a year once the non-competes are banned. Another item they said is one of the reasons to have a ban on non-competes, it would lead to more business formation. And the FTC said it estimates banning non-competes would lead to 2.7% more new business formation per year, again, resulting in over 8,500 additional new businesses annually. Also expected to increase average workers' earnings by $524 per year and lower healthcare costs by $194 billion over the next decade. And I think there are some negative impacts of non-competes as well. Tiana, I don't know if you want to hop in and talk about that for a moment.
So negative impacts on banning non-compete is it really can be, for the most part, like exploitative, right? Where you're keeping employees in a potential undesirable job, right? They're feeling forced to stay in that job, feeling held hostage, right, by a non-compete because they can't leave. So certain examples of this, say, for example, and some people may not know this. I know we're talking about like IT worlds where they're creating stuff, but also even like your news anchors and news reporters, right, that you're seeing on the TV, right? So a lot of times they're under non-competes. So if they do leave their network, they cannot go to another network in the city for a specific period of time. Most of the time, that's probably like 6 months to a year, right? And so I'm not saying people don't have money like that saved up, but given in this economy in 2024, like that's hard to kind of stay with inflation and so forth. So you're essentially forcing people to have to move out and move away, to move to another city or to another state, which is also a cost component. And then if someone does want to start their own business separately from a situation like that, if you get into a company, if you learn something, and maybe you're not stealing that idea, but you have a different idea or maybe a potential better idea and you feel mistreated by an employer, and so you want to start your own, then you could potentially get into a legal ramification with an employer. And then you're really kind of in a pickle because legal costs and court costs, they're expensive and they're long and drained out. So there's definitely different alternatives. So outside of, the non-compete gets removed, the separate alternatives could be your non-disclosure agreements, could be confidentiality agreements. So that's the FTC's, response to this is that, okay, we review that portion of your business to kind of help make sure your trade secrets are manageable and still intact. So let's get into certain rebuttals, I guess, effects on employers, because obviously we'll get into in a little bit, there have been some lawsuits that were hit as soon as this came out, right? The FTC launched it. It is not to go into effect until September of this year. But Chris, maybe talk a little bit about the effects that employers could potentially have with not being allowed to use non-competes anymore.
Employers can no longer rely on the restrictive non-compete clauses to prevent employees from leaving for competitors or starting new businesses. Instead, they need to focus on fostering positive work environments, offering competitive compensation and benefits, and providing genuine opportunities for career growth and to retain top talent. And that's been something I think Tiana and I, we've talked about this before, and I think it's still trending, whether it's HR or payroll, which is about retaining and keeping good talent. And it sounds like they're suggesting this ban is going to also help with regard to employee retention and opportunity. And some alternatives, as Tiana pointed out, that employers are going to need to explore to safeguard their secrets, intellectual property, customer relationships. Those strategies, as Tiana said, non-disclosure agreements or NDAs, and some other things. It also aims to promote work mobility, which, as Tiana said, if you're in a situation where you have a non-compete and you're in, let's say, a media company, as she said, and it's a big city and you have some opportunities. However, you have this non-compete. Are you supposed to go to a smaller city? If you have a family, how is that going to work as far as moving? There's a lot of situations or issues from an employee point of view where you can feel, as Tiana noted, trapped. Rule aims to promote workforce mobility. Hopefully that could spur innovation with new business formation as employees are free to explore more entrepreneurial ventures or join competitors. And I know this, although I won't say names, but I know certain folks in some industries, keep it as generic as possible, who have actually done that, where they worked at a larger company, wanted to take it on their own, and then started their own business. And I'm speaking about someone up in this area, but I'll keep it, as I said, generic. And is doing quite well, operating their own smaller business. They might argue that not having a non-compete in a particular situation would have allowed them to start, kind of hit the ground running to get their business going.
If you guys watch any of the episodes from last year to the episodes that I've been, having this year, I've said pretty frequently, we, all can agree this is now shifting. Like it's still continuing to shift where it's more of an employee market, not necessarily heavily focused on an employer market. So where people used to feel like they couldn't speak up, they had to keep their mouth shut. They had to do this, that, and the third. There's so many other opportunities as we see social media kind of taking over. And I think with this, employees are now demanding what they want, right? And so from an employer stance, it is getting harder. So what Chris just mentioned, like the alternative for an employer is like, treat your employees well, comp them well, keep their loyalty intact as much as possible, keep open communication. I don't think we're definitely no longer in a state where you can just feel like an employee should be happy to work for your company. I think a lot of employees realize now that these larger companies, yes, their name may look good on paper, but walking through the door and being in those situations sometimes aren't always the best. And people are reevaluating now that COVID is hit and everyone, for the most part, is at home or in some type of hybrid stance. There is more flexibility. People have seen a different way of work and are standing ground on that, right? And it's just, I think this is another testament of people wanting more mobility, people not wanting to feel so trapped, people wanting the option to go as they please. I think we're even seeing it outside of like business, right? We can see in the news some of these famous people, right, are just maybe reaping what they sow. I don't know. I have no clue. But it's just like one of those things where you're seeing certain traction now and you're seeing a shift in the world. And I think the FTC is trying to do its due diligence for employees. Clearly, for them to get to this point, there have been enough complaints. Clearly, there's probably been enough lawsuits, right, that have come through that has caused them to look at this and take matters into their own hands. And so I would definitely say, obviously, from an employer stance, yes, it could affect you. But another note is the senior executives, right? So the senior executive group, which I think qualifies as like someone who makes over 151,164 a year. and also someone who was like a policymaker within a company, those non-competes can still stay in place. So for anyone else that does not qualify for that, come September 4th of 2024, the non-competes are out the window. But for those senior executives with that description in their job title, their non-competes will still stay in place. But ironically, I thought it was funny because on the FTC said that is only estimated to be 1% of American workers. And although I'm sure 1% is probably still a good bit of number of people compared to the big majority of the workforce, that's going to be a small world. So I say as employers, if you've not already done so, get your legal team in to review your NDAs, get them to review your confidentiality agreements, and really just follow suit with the lawsuit. I would just say if you can't deal without non-competes, just let it go and make sure you have your trade secrets and other confidentiality stuff covered with your other agreements. And so with that being said, we're going to get into the effects on employees. So similarly to what we kind of just already went through, right? So the FTC is projecting that there's going to be higher projected wages each year by $524. We're talking about this is only going to really affect highly compensated employees, right? And by the time you're probably in that position, you will definitely have more mobility, more room to explore and not feel so trapped and not feel like you have to stay in a job because of this non-compete, right? So I think the NDA, of course, is going to cover some of that. And the confidentiality will cover it. So I will say for employees, as this comes into play, you're of course going to get updated documents from your company, specifically if you're under a non-compete. Definitely pay attention to the wording, right? What's going to be in your new NDAs and what's going to be in your new confidentiality agreements. We all know that, attorneys, hey, look, love them, respect them. I myself am also studying for that portion of life, but the wording that attorneys will use, there could just be one word, right? I think perpetuity is another heavy word, which means like forever, right? To where you can't you can't talk about anything for forever. You can't do anything forever. Just make sure that you're paying attention to every single word in those agreements and have someone spot check it and make sure you actually understand what is being said in these agreements, right? Asked to be in lamer terms. Also, to look, AI is a big thing. We've talked about it on several episodes. So drop it in AI and ask AI to, what does this mean? Like high school level, or something. So it can kind of help you sort through so you absolutely understand what these agreements mean, because what we're going to get into in a little bit when we talk about, any type of legal challenges, I think it's going to definitely be a heavy dogfight between employers and the FTC.
On the employee end, fields like technology, pharmaceuticals, where the trade secrets are of the highest order, that could experience a shift in proprietary knowledge. And maybe it's protected through stricter non-disclosure agreements or other protections. So if you're an employee working for companies in those types of fields, and come September, as we said, we're going to talk about the lawsuits, but if, let's say, come September, everything is status quo and these non-competes are going to go away, you might see other measures to make sure that that particular information in certain industries is going to be better protected. So you might want to look for that. I'm sure the HR departments of many companies are going to be quite busy between now and then. I would also add, just on the employee end, from perhaps an employer point of view, a good company culture, embracing that idea of fostering employee talent, offering good benefits and things of that nature, where you really want to hold that quality talent. That's going to be a benefit to the company. It's also going to be a benefit to the employee. So it's kind of, as cliche as it sounds, a bit of a win-win if you're looking at a non-compete and saying, well, we'd really like to stay in place, but if this ruling holds up, obviously a shift is going to need to be made. And so I think the more you see businesses embrace like the quality company culture that looks at that talent, and the employee from that point of view as well looks at the company and appreciates that they're open for benefits and other sort of things that are really going to keep the employee happy and as such productive, is going to really make this be kind of a speed bump. Some industries may be looking at it to say this could be a big issue, and rightfully so. But I also think if you look at it from a full company, as far as the business and the employees point of view, I think there's areas to work together and ultimately come out on top.
Absolutely. I would say too, go back and look at some of the episode on culture and so forth. Chris just hit it right on the head. It's like communication, benefits, showing that empathy, essentially will bring loyalty, right, into your company. And I mean, there's always going to be those bad apples. We know that, right? But it's like for the most part, I think people do want that sense of feeling and belonging, right, with the company. And they want to feel like that they are being rewarded and being compensated well. And I just think if employers, there are definitely some employers that have figured it out, but for the ones that haven't, once you kind of change a shift and focus on the culture, I think some of this stuff where you're talking about non-competes may or may not really be an issue, right? It might come up one off down the line with someone, but I don't think it would be a longer term issue. So good stuff there, Chris. And then let's just get into like the legal challenges, right? That the FTC will face and how this will all kind of intertwine with the state laws, right? Because that's another biggie. And I know that there have already been some heavy lawsuits that have dropped. I believe Texas was one of the main first ones that I heard it dropped a lawsuit. So there's definitely going to be employers that are all over things like white on rice to try to get this to halt. So, Chris, maybe give us some details on some research that you've done on some of the lawsuits.
Some of the things critics are arguing is that the FTC itself exceeded its statutory authority in issuing a non-compete ban. And they're saying this because the agency has never before utilized its rulemaking power to regulate employee non-compete agreements. The challenges assert that the non-compete rule violates the non-delegation doctrine by lacking an intelligible principle from Congress to guide the FTC's authority. A lot of legal jargon in there, but as Tiana said, one day after this FTC rule had come out, and it was before the effective date, of course, but when they issued it, it was hit with multiple legal challenges. Exactly the day after, the Chamber of Commerce of the U.S. Business Roundtable, Texas Association of Businesses, are among several others that filed lawsuits against the FTC. And they say that the lawsuits aim to expose the vulnerabilities in the FTC's statutory claims of authority, raising doubts about whether the non-compete rule will withstand judicial scrutiny in its current form. So legal experts, they anticipate the challenges are likely to secure injunctions, delaying or blocking the rule's implementation pending further court review. But in other things, if the ban survives, businesses, they still need to assess alternate mechanisms, like we mentioned before, non-disclosure agreements, non-solicitation clauses to protect the proprietary information. So for now, with lots of other rules or laws that come into place and then start to face legal challenges where there's an effective date a little bit down the road, it's still good to plan ahead and not kind of, if you're leaning toward thinking that the court cases are going to ultimately win and this will not stand, it's still probably a good idea to start looking at your non-competes, chatting with your HR department, chatting with payroll, and communicating things to your employees. Again, we're talking about that good company culture. Just get it out in the open and talk about what's happening. And this way, you've got a plan in place, perhaps if the ban is upheld, and if it's not, if you just keep that communication, the lines of communication open, I think ultimately your employees will appreciate the current situation of these lawsuits and having a little bit of uncertainty. And also, as an employer, you can prepare because at some point there's going to be compliance issues to come to fruition. So you really want to kind of, again, not to be too cliche, but get your ducks in a row regarding this ban that's coming up in early September.
So as Chris mentioned, look, there's still workarounds. I would say even from like an employer stance, like there are still other agreements, right? So like a non-compete restricting someone from doing something after they exit a business, there's still definitely ways to make sure your business is protected. So when we talk about the confidentiality agreements, when we talk about the non-disclosure agreements, those are the things I think we probably should pay attention to. I think removing the non-competes definitely helps employees not feel so burdened, right? To be with a company and not feel so scared, right? Because getting up and having to work, obviously, because we all have bills to pay, but then going to a job and having an urge to do something else, but feeling like you're trapped, I think is what the FTC is trying to prevent, right? And so all good things. I am actually really interested to see how this is going to pan out in court, if this is going to stand, especially because employers are saying that the FTC kind of like took too much of a lead on what they put together. And I know we are seeing a lot of lawsuits. We're seeing a lot of changes. We're seeing a lot of things pass through. But it also almost seems like the FTC is trying to help the economy, right? If you think about more businesses that could be out there and, more ideas, right? And more innovative ways to go about doing things. I think they're trying to get us to that point. And so hopefully their intentions were really, really good. And hopefully it's received well. And we'll see. More to be determined. I'm like so interested to kind of see. This is going to get really juicy in the next couple of months, probably 6 months to a year. The courts take a very long time. But I would say for employers, make sure you have your other agreements intact from an employee stance. Make sure you're paying attention to that. And we will see more to come from there. So, final thing we wanted to kind of discuss is just, based on the current state of this ban, what like next steps we can potentially expect, and then also like where can we stay up to speed on, upcoming updates. So, Chris, you want to take this one?
The Federal Trade Commission's website and official communication channels are going to have the latest updates on the rule status, effective dates, and amendments or clarifications issued. And I would say when there's a ruling, just to put it in a different context, when the Department of Labor had a worker classification rule, this is going back a couple of years, different administration changes. When there was a ruling from a certain court, they did put that up on their site and just provide that information. So I would say check out the FTC website for sure. Look at legal publications, look for that expert analysis, law firms in other areas, business and human resource publications, of course, I think are good to check out. They'll be keeping their eye on this throughout. And then just continue complying with the existing laws. I think also, we both probably agree, since there are two possible outcomes, you could say, okay, this could remain a status quo, or this ban is going to take effect in early September, regardless of, the legal challenges are not going to pan out. And so just that communication, good plan, talk with your employees, and just think about and prepare for it, because unfortunately time can go pretty fast sometimes. And even though we got a couple months, in a blink of an eye, it could be the end of August, and maybe these legal challenges do not have a stay on the ban, and then it takes effect in early September.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, too, the SHRM site, so the HR site, should probably have some definitely good publications. I've seen a couple of posts from them too. Or, just get with your HR, payroll peeps, any type of employment law attorneys too. A lot of them are having webinars on that as well. So it's all very good, interesting stuff. And there's going to be a lot more to come. I would say, though, that just at least be prepared for September 4th, right? I think that's just the big thing. You don't want to be left behind, because back in the day where it used to take like the states or the IRS a really long time to come back with like audits or penalties and so forth. I don't know if that's really going on anymore. Everyone is still like in the need, right, to like get their money and get their funds right. And AI is also being programmed on the back end with a lot of this stuff. So a lot of things are spitting out quicker than we can expect. So I would just say you don't want to just think, oh, it's never going to pass or it's never going to get through or whatever. Like, no, it's here. So let's just conform to it. And even if something does get changed in court, I think as we go back to talking about culture, right? How good would it be that you're just like, whatever happens, but we're going to remove our non-competes, right? And we're going to make sure we're covered through NDAs, confidentiality agreements. I think that would make employees feel more comfortable being at work and still, continuing work with your business. So that's all good stuff. So more to come down the line. There could be a potential follow-up episode on this, come fall, once things, really get going and the courts start looking into things. But we're going to close this out now. So thanks so much, Chris, for joining us again today. So excited to have you back and just having this conversation. This is like reminding me of old times. So thanks for spending some time and being on. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Tiana. It's just great to be back.
And then next episode, we'll have another couple of weeks. We'll have another couple of episodes coming up. So much surprises coming along with that. But stay tuned for the next episode, and we will see you soon.